emphasise the safety of patients in the health service in Scotland instead of trying to scaremonger because of what happened in one case.
That concludes portfolio questions. We move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 9294 in the name of Claire Baker on air quality in Scotland. Could members who wish to participate in this debate please press the request to speak buttons now. I'll allow a few seconds for members to change places. I indicate at the outset we are tight for time in the debates this afternoon. I call on Claire Baker to speak to and move the motion. Maximum 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Poor air quality is a daily experience for too many people across Scotland. If you live, work, go to school or nursery in streets which have high levels of air pollution, it will have an impact on your health, and if you have an ongoing medical condition, that impact will be greater. Our air quality is in breach of legally binding European air quality limits on nitrogen dioxide and tougher Scottish standards on air quality. For people living in these communities, that is unacceptable, but in many ways, modern air pollution is invisible. The Minister may stress that emissions have fallen significantly since 1990, but he knows as well as I do this is mainly due to the closure of steel plants. Our society is one that has changed from our air quality being polluted by heavy industry or the burning of domestic fossil fuels, where through tighter regulations and new technologies we have made improvements in these areas, to one where urban air pollution is like passive smoking. It's invisible and it's impacting on the most vulnerable. I had a look at the Scottish Air Quality website this morning, which reports on the air quality monitoring sites. This morning, air pollution levels at 3 locations across Scotland are elevated: Falkirk Banknock, Edinburgh's Salamander Street and Dumbarton Road in Glasgow. The official classification of air pollution levels at these sites is moderate, but the levels of P10, which is the small particles, are being recorded at over 50 micrograms per cubic metre. If that average stays above 50 for the rest of today, it would be in breach of the daily average limit, and we should only have 7 breaches of a daily limit allowed in each year. So while we're discussing this in the Chamber this afternoon, poor air quality is impacting on people's health today. There is evidence that it reduces life expectancy, and there are investigations into links with cancer. Poor air quality affects people, particularly with respiratory conditions, as well as those with cardiovascular conditions. It has a more significant impact on children, and if you're sitting in a car bumper to bumper, those pollutants can seep into your car, making that air more polluted than the air that is outside. I know that many members across the Chamber are concerned about this issue and frequently raise questions with the Government. I'd like to recognise the work that Friends of the Earth are doing to raise awareness of the damage that poor air quality in urban areas is doing and to help to push it up the political agenda. Although particles and pollutions travel, the majority of urban poor air quality is caused by road traffic. Addressing poor air quality needs political will, commitment and, crucially, resources, not just financial, but also in terms of capacity within government and within SEPA to drive this forward and make progress. I'm not suggesting that meeting the EU targets or the Scottish standards are easy, though it is becoming difficult to find an environment target the Government is actually meeting. But the European Commission has launched legal proceedings against the UK because of a lack of progress in cutting levels of nitrogen dioxide, with Glasgow being cited particularly as a city of concern. Other European countries are failing to also meet the target, but the lack of a convincing strategy from the UK, which Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland contribute to, has raised concern. And furthermore, the tougher Scottish standards, which were enabled by the 1995 Environment Act, have never been met, missing the 2005 target on nitrogen and the 2010 target on small particles. So there's not a lot of confidence around that under the current plans these targets will be met. Of course, what we need to see is greater investment in and a focus on modal shift, making walking, cycling and public transport options more attractive for people. The Government have a target of increasing cycle journeys to 10% by 2020, increasing air quality as part of making that more attractive. There are ongoing concerns that the active travel budget is not funded at a level which would make these aims achievable. We need to see more integrated transport options. And our bus network has huge potential to deliver more in this area. Passenger cars produce nearly 60% of all CO2 emissions from road transport across the UK, compared to 5% from buses. And in a city centre, a journey by bus can result in half the CO2 emissions per passenger compared to a car. Buses are often seen as the problem, but they actually should be seen as part of the solution. They need to be reliable, quick and pleasant, but they're often snared up in city traffic. So more needs to be done to avoid congestion, invest in the bus stop infrastructure and real-time information. And measures such as the Green Bus Fund and the Bus Investment Fund are welcome, but cuts to the Bus Operators Grant makes this progress more difficult, as it's resulting in less routes and restricting people's alternative options. And buses are... briefly.
Minister.
Claire Baker for taking intervention. I would just highlight in the Bus Operators Grant the change in focus of that to avoid bus operators having an incentive to burn fuel. It's something I hope she would welcome, because it would contribute to better air quality in reducing the availability of opportunities for buses to simply sit and burn fuel.
Claire Baker.
But the experience in communities is that it's leading to less routes and higher fares, and that is working against the policy that's encouraging people into buses. And buses are still the poor neighbours of trains in terms of public subsidy, even though they have more passengers. But it's also about car management. The RPP2 doesn't have a target for reduced car use or journeys. The Not Far Leave the Car campaign is fine as far as it goes, but it's not really going to change the step change that is needed. We do need to engage the public. That's another reason why the Friends of the Earth campaign is so welcome. Some of the options out there might not be popular, but there are many options for carrot instead of stick. Tackling urban air pollution needs to be done in partnership with local authorities. They have the responsibility for monitoring air quality, declaring problems and producing air quality action plans. There are currently 35 air quality action plans in Scotland, but they are failing to deliver on the reductions. I know the Government are currently reviewing the local air quality action plans, and I'm pleased that one of the outcomes is expected to be increased monitoring of fine particles. And I hope that will also include a plan to introduce a Scottish standard for these. We also need to consider whether we have the appropriate obligations on local authorities. But we need to be honest about the difficulties local authorities face in achieving these targets. While they have the statutory responsibilities to manage air quality, the statutory obligation for meeting the air quality target is on the Scottish Government. Local authorities are often working in historic environments that were not designed for modern travel or population numbers. They're working on short electoral cycles, which can make some of the more unpopular decisions and options difficult to deliver. And we can't forget that they are working under significant financial pressures. And we have to ask if the Government gives enough direction and levers to local authorities to deliver. While the Minister will point to welcome projects and pilots, in replies to recent parliamentary questions, the Scottish Government have confirmed that improving air quality is not an expectation of the single outcome agreements with local authorities or community planning partners. The Government have also not included the need to meet air quality objectives in the Scottish Planning Policy or the National Planning Framework 3. We also need to ask whether existing tools are being used effectively, and I walked from the station this morning past hotels where coaches were just sitting outside idling, and I live opposite a primary school where cars will often sit with their engines running for 15 minutes until the school closes. There is a power for local authorities to apply to be able to fine vehicles that are idling, but I understand only 6 authorities have so far applied to use this power. So the RPP2 is the underpinning strategic document, but in terms of action in this area, it's not been a particularly convincing set of proposals. For Scotland to meet its annual emissions targets, it needs the EU to set the target at 30%, and for all the policies and all the proposals to be introduced. There is an over-reliance in RPP2 on proposals, and the concern that failure to meet early targets makes it harder to deliver in later years is justified. So there are opportunities to strengthen the policy direction, to give more tools to partners to make a difference, and we should take them. The proposed low-emission strategy must be the focus of renewed emphasis. It must be robust. It must provide a clear timetable for action. We need to have ambition to have no longer a need for air quality management areas. The Government announced the strategy, but we have little information on what it will include or if it will be consulted upon. And given the weakness of RPP2 on transport and the lack of focus on air quality in the planning policy, it needs to give added impetus to delivery in these areas. In terms of the amendments, and I welcome the contribution from other members in the Chamber, I don't fully understand the Conservatives' need to take out the reference to the European Commission's legal action, which is a statement of fact. But as I've outlined, I do agree with the analysis of RPP2. While I'm sympathetic to the Greens amendment and support calls to see more investment in low-emission travel, I am cautious of the mechanism of proportionality and the consequences it might have on big infrastructure projects. That might be the intention of the Greens, but I think there's also concerns around what that would mean if you were to put, it was a big rail transport project, for example, how that the potential for big projects on either side of the debate to skew how proportionality would work. But I look forward to Patrick Harvie's contribution to the debate. And the Government's amendment asked me to put faith into a strategy that I've not yet seen, so I'll listen to what the Minister has to say further on this. Air pollution remains Scotland's greatest environmental health threat, one that affects people and communities every day across Scotland, contributing to and causing poor health, impacting most on the young and the vulnerable. But it is a solution with a problem which is within our power, and we should work together and be bold enough to tackle it. I move the motion in my name.
Many thanks. And I now call on Paul Wheelhouse to speak to and move Amendment 9294.3. Maximum 7 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Air quality in Scotland is generally good, but there are areas where it is of poor quality, affecting the health of some individuals. Policies introduced over recent years to reduce emissions from transport and industry have allowed us to make real progress in driving down pollution levels. But the Scottish Government is committed to maintaining and enhancing this situation. We have come a long way since the smogs in the 1950s. To be fair to Claire Baker, a lot of that has been down to deindustrialisation, I recognise that. But overall, the air we breathe today is cleaner than at any time since the Industrial Revolution. We have achieved great cleaner air through regulating industrial emissions, progressively tightening vehicle emissions and fuel standards, and controlling smoke. We continue to make progress in improving Scotland's air quality. Emissions data released last year show that between 1990 and 2011, nitrogen dioxide decreased by 65%, particulates by 58% and sulphur dioxide by 79%. Further decreases are predicted up to 2030 compared to 2010 levels. Nitrogen oxides are expected to decline by a further 45%, particulates by 5% and sulphur dioxide by 40%. Despite very real achievements, we have to acknowledge that areas of poorer air quality remain in some of our local areas. Clearly, still much more remains to be done if we are to maintain momentum and deliver benefits. Air pollution disproportionately affects the health of the most vulnerable members of society, the very young, the elderly, and those with existing cardiovascular and respiratory conditions, and it can affect their quality of life. People rightly expect to be able to breathe clean air, and we are determined to reduce emissions still further by working closely with Transport Scotland, local authorities, SEPA, Health Protection Scotland and others. The Scottish Government demonstrates its commitment to delivering clean air for a good quality of life in the air quality strategy. This sets out the policy framework for air quality in Scotland, with objectives for a number of pollutants of concern for human health. It sets out the clear links between poor air quality and public health, current levels of air pollution, shorten life expectancy by an average of, I understand, 7 to 8 months, at an annual cost to society that's measured in billions of pounds. Across the UK, air pollution causes up to 24,000 deaths per year, 9 times more than traffic fatalities, so it's clearly a significant problem. And we can all play a part in helping deliver cleaner air to ensure a less polluted environment, both now and for future generations, whether as businesses or indeed as individuals. In this context, it's vitally important that we communicate our message that personal behavioural choices play a key role in improving local environmental quality. Individual actions make a difference. All of us have a duty to ensure that we get this message across in a way that is relevant to people's lives. Much more being done by the Scottish Government and our partners, which benefits air quality. For instance, Transport Scotland initiatives such as the Green Bus Fund, which was mentioned by Claire Baker, and the Plug-in Vehicles Roadmap not only contribute to our work to tackle greenhouse gas emissions, but also help to reduce air pollution. This is an excellent example of how we are coordinating our policies to deliver win-win outcomes for both air quality and climate change. We've also recently provided SEPA with £200,000 to fund the work of the Urban Air Quality Group, a partnership which aims to support and assist efforts throughout Scotland to improve urban air quality. Of the various pollutants for which objectives have been set, particulate matter can be singled out for special attention. There are well-documented short and long-term effects on human health of particulate pollution. Indeed, it's not currently possible to discern a threshold concentration below which there are no effects of this pollutant on human health. Both short-term and long-term exposure to ambient levels of particulate matter are consistently associated with respiratory and cardiovascular illness and mortality, as well as other ill health effects. We have responded to this by adopting the most challenging air quality objectives in the UK. Objectives have been in place for particles of 10 microns or less in diameter, commonly referred to as PM10. However, recent reviews by the World Health Organization and others have suggested exposure to a finer fraction of particles, PM2.5, give a stronger association with the observed ill health effects. We therefore set provisional objectives for PM2.5 in the 2007 Air Quality Strategy Review. In many urban areas of Scotland, reductions in ambient particle concentrations are required to achieve these ambitious objectives. Local authorities have a vital role to play in helping us secure further improvements to air quality, not only in respect of the idling buses that was mentioned and the need to control those, but also in terms of their management of air quality management areas, which have been designated by local authorities and associated air quality action plans prepared to work towards achieving these reductions. Last year, we consulted on proposals to overhaul and revamp the local air quality management system. These proposals attracted widespread support, and I believe that once implemented, they will enable local authorities to deliver their air quality responsibilities even more effectively. Amongst the key proposals which we are currently developing for further consultation are to incorporate the provisional PM2.5 objectives into regulations, placing a legal obligation on local authorities to monitor this important pollutant, to streamline the reporting process to free up time and resources for implementing actions, to maintain the Scottish Air Quality Monitoring Network at its current level, to place greater emphasis on action plan delivery through updated and more focused guidance, and to develop a clear message on the health impacts of poor air quality as a centrepiece of a national coordinated campaign. I will indeed.
Claudia Beamish.
I thank the Minister. Could the Minister clarify the timescales for this project, please?
Minister, you're approaching your last minute.
Thank you. We're hoping to have that by the end of the calendar year, and I'll provide more information to the member. We're also in the process of developing a national low-emission strategy. The strategy will draw together the wide range of policies and initiatives being taken forward by the Scottish Government and others. It will highlight and strengthen the links between air quality and other elements of the Government's work on climate change, transport, renewable energy, health and planning. It will set out the contribution that reduced air pollution can make to sustainable economic growth and the quality of life in our towns and cities. Alongside our domestic air quality targets, we also have national responsibilities. The UK, along with other EU member states, has to comply with air quality limit values set in European legislation. Failure to achieve these by the required dates could lead to infraction and heavy fines. Indeed, the European Commission has in the last few weeks written to the UK Government indicating it tends to commence infraction proceedings in respect of failure to comply with nitrogen dioxide limit values in 15 zones in England, plus the Glasgow urban area. We're also working closely with the UK Government to prepare a response to the Commission which demonstrates how we intend to secure full compliance as soon as possible. We cannot afford to be complacent. There are still many air pollution issues to be addressed. Work must continue to ensure the achievements of recent years are not just maintained but improved upon, and that our evidence base is the best possible quality. In this way, we hope, Presiding Officer, to ensure a cleaner, greener Scotland for us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now calling Jamie McGregor to speak to and move Amendment 9294.1, maximum 5 minutes.
Thank you. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to today's debate on air quality. I believe it's useful that Labour is using its debating time to highlight this important issue. Claire Baker set out effectively the Scottish Government's failures to meet specific EU air quality standards. While we recognise that overall there have been significant reductions in air pollutants since the 1990 baselines, it's a matter of real concern to all of us in this chamber that unacceptably high levels of air pollution, especially from nitrogen dioxide, which causes increased ground-level ozone and particulate matter, have been shown in 2013 in some of the busiest commuter and shopping streets in Scotland, such as the Byres Road in Glasgow and Hope Street in Glasgow, Queensferry Road in Edinburgh. And as has been pointed out, some of these high levels of air pollution break targets set in the 1990s, which were to be met by 2005, according to the Air Quality Scotland regulation. All of us know that nitrogen oxides in our environment also cause acid rain, which damages plant and animal life in forests, lochs and rivers, as well as harming building and historical sites. High levels of nitrogen oxides can also cause eutrophication, which threatens biodiversity through the excessive growth of plant algae. Planting more trees in urban areas can help to mitigate levels of some air pollutants, and we're very supportive of that. As the Labour motion makes clear today, the potential impact on human health of poor air quality can be severe. It's been suggested that over 1,500 deaths in Scotland each year have air pollution as a contributory factor, and this must be a major concern. At high concentrations, nitrogen dioxide and particulates can cause inflammation of the airways and can affect lung capacity. Some studies suggest long-term exposure to fine particulate matter may be associated with increased rates of chronic bronchitis. As a sufferer of respiratory problems myself, I am very conscious of the effect of poor air quality. Put simply, for many Scots, it can be much harder to breathe in congested city streets. The presence and concentration of pollutants in our air is obviously very affected by the prevailing climatic conditions, and I would commend the efforts of the Met Office in Scotland, who are working with the community health partnerships and local doctors to support people self-managing some long-term conditions known to be impacted by weather conditions. Their Healthy Outlook service specifically helps those with COPD, as well as having an impact on those who suffer from respiratory illnesses like asthma and COPD. Recent research published in the British Medical Journal suggested that exposure to fine particles in the air increases the risk of heart attacks and unstable angina as well. My amendment today refers to the Scottish Government's failures to meet overall emissions targets. Meeting these targets, tackling climate change and improving air quality are all interconnected, and as shared aims and progress in each area will see corresponding progress elsewhere. It is of course important that Scotland meets and is seen to meet air quality targets as we seek to persuade other nations of the need to take action in that regard. And it seems ironic that Scotland, a country renowned worldwide for its beautiful mountain scenery and clean environment, should be plagued by bad air quality in specific areas. We have the great advantage of masses of space for our population, so we should be ahead of the game and not languishing behind on these targets. And it does appear that local... am I allowed to? Yes?
Yes. I'll keep this brief. I thank the member for taking an
Minister
intervention.
Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the member for taking an intervention. He refers to the Scottish Government lagging behind and failing to meet its targets. Would I like to comment on the fact there are 15 areas in England which are failing the standard, and indeed that we have tougher climate change legislation in Scotland and higher targets than his own government in London?
Well, I take
In
that
the last
point.
45 seconds, Mr. McGregor.
I take that point. I mean, I was just hoping... How long have I got, Presiding Officer? 45 seconds. I take that point. It does appear that local authorities are somewhat uncertain and confused as to what they're meant to be doing in achieving EU air quality values. It seems easy to diagnose the problems, but difficult to know what measures to take to solve them. So this uncertainty must be cleared up, and the role of local authority involvement must be made clearer. They should be playing a key role in making air quality action plans have a much more significant impact on the problems. And in closing my contribution, we welcome today's focus on air quality, and we urge ministers to work closely with our local authorities and all other stakeholders to implement practical measures to tackle the most alarming occurrences of poor air quality in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on Patrick Harvey to speak to and move Amendment 9294.2. Mr Harvey, up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I, first of all, welcome the Labour Party's choice of topic in bringing a motion on air quality to the Chamber today. The Minister said, I think in the first few words, air quality in Scotland is generally good. The Minister said people rightly expect to be able to breathe clean air. The Minister said we cannot afford to be complacent. The Minister talked about the effect that air pollution can have on the health of the most vulnerable members of society. The Minister talked about the role of local authorities in declaring air quality management areas and drawing up action plans. The Minister, when she made these comments, was of course responding on behalf of the Scottish Executive, as it was then. Can you guess where I'm going with this yet? I'm talking about a debate, it happened to be my first members' debate, way back in 2005. And all of the comments made, many of them verbatim, were in today's speech to this debate from the current Minister in the current Scottish Government. It does seem to me that This is a long-standing issue which everybody agrees we must do more to tackle. Everybody agrees we cannot afford to be complacent, and yet we actually change very little. There were striking similarities between the two speeches. There were some differences as well. Rona Brankin, in responding to that debate back in 2005, at least had a bit more specific information to say about transport and recognising that road transport is the primary cause of the problem, particularly in the hotspot areas such as those that I represent in Glasgow, where Hope Street remains a chronic area for poor air quality, by many measures the worst in Scotland. But in making those comments and in actually talking about the unique situation in Glasgow having the M8 running through the city centre, she then went on 2 or 3 minutes later to talk up the idea of building another motorway through Glasgow, which brings even more of the same problem to our city. And sadly, that's something which the current Scottish Government, a project they were only too pleased to complete, the M74 Northern Extension. And since then, since that time, what have we seen in terms of progress? Well, I've got the traffic stats for Glasgow here. And since the beginning of the century, there have only been 2 years, only 2 years since the beginning of the century, that have seen a reduction either in all motor vehicles or in cars. If we're acknowledging that this is the cause of the problem, let's do something about the cause rather than write continually more frustrating air quality action plans while continuing to make the cause worse, not better. And I think across the whole of Scotland, some of those statistics are very similar. While the UK in 2012 saw only a very marginal decrease in road traffic levels, Scotland managed a marginal increase. And it's many years since the arguments on road traffic reduction targets, the idea of demand management on our roads, has been fashionable. The situation in Glasgow, as I've mentioned, is particularly chronic in terms of NO2 and PM10s, but it's not limited to Glasgow by any means. It's a national issue. In East Lothian, for example, my colleagues in the local Green branch have been campaigning on high street air pollution and used FOI requests, which resulted in a revelation that the local council had been sitting on a report on those issues for a year. Since that was released, there is at least the declaration of a management area and some beginnings of a recognition for a need for action. The Minister today mentioned planning, and I regret that there's only a fleeting mention in the National Planning Framework of the need to use the planning system in protecting the quality of our air. And the SNP's manifesto commitment, similar to that at the end of my own amendment, talks about increasing the proportion of transport spend that goes on low-carbon, active and sustainable transport. I wonder whether the Minister can respond on behalf of his colleague, the Transport Minister, and say whether he will actually turn up this year to peddle on Parliament to discuss that with the people who've been campaigning most vociferously for it.
Many thanks.
I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. And we now move to open debates. We're extraordinarily tight for time. Up to 4 minutes, please. Colin Marco-Biaggi, to be followed by Cara Hilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The word noxious long predates the identification of NOx, nitrogen oxides, but it's as fitting a word as any to describe them and their health effects on the people that have to breathe them in, alongside particulate matter, especially the very young, the very old, or those with existing respiratory conditions. As an asthmatic with 2 decades of prescriptions behind me and who walks to work every day through an air quality management area, I should declare an interest. But it also gives me the advantage that walking through some of Scotland's most polluted streets in my constituency, I can feel the pain of those who are affected, quite literally. And as citizens of a modern democratic nation, we should be able to expect the air we breathe to sustain us rather than to harm us. Following the expansion last year of the part of central Edinburgh that classed as officially polluted, I wrote to Leslie Hines, the portfolio holder for Transport and Environment in the City of Edinburgh Council, and a Labour councillor, urging her and her officials to consider a low-emission zone in central Edinburgh. In particular, I was concerned about buses, having found figures that showed that while some operators, like Lothian buses, had been exemplary in their rollout of new vehicles, others just hadn't kept up, and had been inspired by examples from Norwich, Oxford and London, where local authorities have imposed minimum standards on all buses entering the city centre. Since then, First Bus have stepped up with a 425-unit order, and Lothian buses, who were at the time very enthusiastic in their response, have continued to be enthusiastic customers of the Scottish Government's Green Bus Fund and the previous emissions reduction grant scheme. The volume of HGVs in the city centre has already been reduced by the bids, collectivisation of commercial waste, and the City Council in Edinburgh has an enviable cross-party consensus on investing more in cycling and walking routes that I believe other authorities should look to as an example. Successive council administrations of various colours have also used the very limited lever of residents' parking permit charges to incentivise lower emission vehicles. For me, the lesson is very clear from the Edinburgh experience that if there is to be change, it must be driven locally. The Scottish Government has a very important role in providing support and indeed wielding the big stick of targets within the legal framework, demanding the action plans with a very welcome overhaul of them in progress. But municipalities must be on side, as we can't nationalise the day-to-day management of every pavement, bus lane, high street in the land, nor should we, even if we could. Nor could we, from this place, set stronger fuel standards or further VAD incentives. I'm sorry, I only have 4 minutes. Nor should we wish to, could we take the more radical steps that Sweden is proposing to remove fossil fuels from transport entirely by 2030. How that interacts with Patrick Harvey's point about removing cars, I'm not quite sure. Surely if they were non-emitting, then there wouldn't be as much of a problem. But make no mistake, significant progress has been made. A fortnight ago, in an answer to a PQI lodge, the Environment Minister stated that Scotland, bar one stretch of intercity road, would reach European standards by 2015. This is considerably ahead of cities in the rest of the UK, where the standards will not be met until 2020, or in the case of London, potentially 2025, and indeed ahead of much of the rest of Europe too. But just because Europe's performance is 6 out of 10, England's performance is 7 out of 10, doesn't mean we should rest on the laurels of a performance that might be 8 or 9 out of 10. My constituents and the visitors to Princes Street, George Street, the West End, the Grassmarket, Gorgie and Dalry roads need 10 out of 10. With the continuing offers of help and support from the Scottish Government and the substantive low-emission strategy, I hope the City of Edinburgh Council treats this issue with the seriousness it deserves. Councillor Hines described my LEZ proposal as an interesting proposal, but soon I hope it is a reality.
Many thanks. Now call on Cara Hilton to be followed by Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Every day on streets of towns and cities across Scotland, we are exposed to pollutants that can and do damage public health. From Glasgow to Edinburgh, from Aberdeen to Dundee, in my own constituency of Dunfermline and across Scotland, air pollution is a serious and growing problem that impacts on every one of us every single day. As some MSPs have already highlighted, it's an absolute scandal that every year in Scotland at least 1,500 people die prematurely because of this silent and invisible killer. And across the UK, the figure is 29,000 a year and rising. It's a huge concern to me that parts of my own constituency have the highest air pollution levels in Fife, such as Appin Crescent near the centre of Dunfermline, where nitrogen dioxide and PM10 particle levels are so high the area is subject to an air quality action plan. There is absolutely no doubt, as anyone who has been stuck in a traffic jam on Halbeath Road will tell you, that it's excessive road traffic and congestion in the area that's to blame. As Claire Baker highlighted, air pollution is a real danger to both public health and to the wider environment. Short-term exposure has been linked with an increase to hospital admissions, with tens of thousands of people across Scotland suffering respiratory symptoms on days when particle levels are high. But it's the impact of long-term exposure that's most alarming. In 2013, the World Health Organisation's cancer charity agency classified the cocktail of air pollution we are exposed to every day as carcinogenic to humans and named it as the leading cause of cancer deaths in the world. And recently, a European study found that long-term exposure to small and fine particles increases the risk of coronary events, including heart attacks and unstable angina, with the link being seen at levels of exposure below the current air pollution standards we have in Scotland, standards that we aren't even meeting. These are frightening findings that are undermining public health in communities across Scotland, and they're undermining social justice too, because it's the most vulnerable in our society, the sick, the young and the elderly, who are most at risk from exposure to dangerous levels of air pollution and most likely to suffer health consequences as a result of our failure to act. After smoking, the biggest public health risk we face is from the very air that we breathe. The World Health Organization sets guidelines and limits for different air pollutants, which Scotland should have achieved almost a decade ago. Yet these legal limits are failing to be upheld in many communities across Scotland, and as a result, tens of thousands of people across Scotland have paid the ultimate price. The Scottish Government have been in power for 7 years now, and while I do recognise that some action is being taken, the reality is that we are still failing to meet both the standards we have set ourselves and the lower standards set by the European Union. The National Low Emission Strategy is a positive step forward, but it needs to be more than a vision. We also need a clear timetable for action, and we need clear, concrete measures to ensure Scottish air quality standards are met, to ensure that everyone in Scotland can breathe air that is clean. And as Patrick Harvey highlighted, this isn't just about ensuring that we've got cleaner private vehicles on the roads. We also need to make sure that we've got less private vehicles on the roads and to make active travel a more realistic option. We've all got a responsibility to act, to make sure people have got a better quality of life now, and that our children have got a better quality of life too, and their grandchildren, and for future generations. In their briefing to MSPs, Friends of the Earth said that air pollution remains Scotland's greatest environmental health threat, and they are right. The Scottish Government can and must do more. Local authorities can and must do more. And individually, we all can and must do more. I look forward to hearing from the Minister about how he plans to ensure that the air we breathe is safe. I think it's simply unacceptable that 1,500 people in Scotland are dying every year because of air pollution. We need urgent action now to tackle this hidden danger all around us. It's putting thousands of Scots' lives at risk. We need action, not words.
Many thanks. Now call on Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Tavish Scott. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Environment Act of 1995 required local authorities to assess air quality in their area, and where it exceeds air quality standards, declare an air quality management area and to prepare air quality action plans to tackle the problem. Edinburgh currently has 5 air quality management areas, and over the last 2 decades the Council has introduced a number of initiatives to encourage people out of their cars. This includes greenways for public transport, park and ride sites located around the city boundary and the City Car Club. These initiatives have encouraged people out of their cars, with 30% of the population using either the bus or train, 25% walking and 7% cycling in 2011. Across Scotland, the result has been that since the 1990s there has been a significant reduction in pollution emissions, with nitrogen oxides having decreased by 65%, particulates by 58% and sulphur dioxide by 79%. In Edinburgh, we had seen improvements in air quality up until recently, with St John's Road annual mean concentration of nitrogen oxide levels falling by a third between 2008 and 2010. However, we are starting to see air quality deterioration along the 4 main arterial routes into the city from the west as a result of an increase in the volume of traffic. St John's Road has increased 23% over the 2-year period to 2012, with Queensferry Road breaching the limit by nearly 13% in 2013. The A71 at Gorgie Road End has seen annual mean concentration levels of nitrogen oxide increase close to the EU limit. In my constituency, the A70 at Curry is the only main arterial route in the west to have very low levels of nitrogen oxide. But that's hardly surprising when you realise that the monitoring station is not at the Lanark Road, but is located beyond a housing estate behind the main building of the high school. Further along the A70 at Slateford Road, there are signs that the annual levels may be being exceeded, suggesting that the monitoring station at Curry should probably be relocated to a location closer to the main road. This increasing air quality problem in the west of the city can only get worse as we see more and more proposals for housing developments, whether it is Edinburgh's Garden District or new homes surrounding Rathole Village, or indeed in the Edinburgh Western constituency of Colin-Keir. There is also new developments being built in West Lothian. All of these additional homes, which run into many thousands, are commutable into Edinburgh, and this will deteriorate the quality of life for people already living along the main routes into Edinburgh. The planning system must treat air quality as a material planning consideration. The planning system plays a key role in protecting and improving the environment. Land use planning and development control can become an effective tool to improve air quality by first locating developments in such a way as to reduce emissions overall, and secondly, reducing the direct impacts of those developments. Although the presence of an air quality management area makes consideration of the air quality impacts of a proposed development more important, there is still a need to regard air quality as a material factor in determining planning applications in any location. This is particularly important where the proposed development is not physically within the air quality management area, but could have adverse impacts on air quality within it, or where air quality in that given area is close to exceeding guidelines objections itself. Presiding Officer, I welcome that the Scottish Government is currently reviewing and overhauling the local air quality management system. In order for any new system to be effective, we need to not only reduce emissions from traffic, but also to ensure that planning decisions do not add to the problem. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Tavish Scott to be followed by Nigel Dawn. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank Claire Baker and the Labour Party for bringing forward a debate on air quality, and broadly agree with the tenor of the remarks made by the front benches in relation to the challenge we face. But it strikes me that it's one thing to announce more strategies and yet more action plans and all the rest of it. This is a classic case of acting local while thinking global. I have to say that my reading into air management plans and air management strategies is that they simply haven't worked. And maybe the Minister should just start with a blank piece of paper here and accept that these targets, whether they be set at European level, UK level and Scottish level, haven't been met. I noticed he didn't pick that up in his speech. Maybe he'll do that in his wind-up. Admit that where we are, and then suggest, rather than all these things that just haven't worked in the past, we would be better looking at a new approach. Because Patrick Harvey was quite right, although Patrick probably should be grateful that it's Paul Wheelhouse on the front bench and not Fergus Ewing, because I recall the days that when Fergus Ewing was doing these debates for the SNP, there was a slightly more different approach than the one that Mr Wheelhouse identified in his earlier remarks. But Patrick Harvey was right about transport. I suspect that was the point that the Minister was implying as well in his remarks. The fundamental of tackling these in the kind of areas that some members have described this afternoon is in dealing with transport and in dealing with the emissions that come from transport. And in that sense, the easiest way to start is in public sector leadership. How many ministerial cars, for example, are hybrid? How many ministerial cars are still run on a simple combustion engine, as they were, in fairness, in my day? I hope the Minister has made a big inroad into that, and that he would say to this chamber that every ministerial car that will sweep all the ministers home tonight from work will be running on some kind of hybrid engine. I hope that he would set a target for the health boards across Scotland, for local government, for all the public agency vehicles, fleets and otherwise, who operate across Scotland, to be moving towards, over a period of time, a position where none are running on old diesel and petrol engines, but are instead running on hybrids. That would show some clear leadership from the public sector. It's one of the few areas where the public sector, whether it be national or local government, can set out a very strong target about the need for change. And I suspect he'd have our clear support if he were to do that. I would certainly be very happy to make that case in my part of the world, all but a part of the world that doesn't have the same kind of air quality problems, I accept, as members who've described the situation in Glasgow or in Edinburgh. But it seems to me that that is where the argument is. It is about transport emissions. I thought the analysis around the deindustrialisation, the change from the heavy emission-producing plants of Scotland of yesteryear is exactly that, in the past. And therefore, when one assesses why Scotland's missing our climate change obligations, why we're missing some of the targets that are in the Labour and other motions and amendments today, it does come fundamentally down to transport. Now, we talk the talk around demand management. Some of us who've been in here a while will remember, for example, the debate in this capital city about whether there should be a tolling regime in order to pay for public transport. That was thrown out by all parties. All parties ducked it. We all should hold up our hands and admit we all ducked it. OK, the Greens didn't duck it, but everyone else ducked it. But they ducked it in Glasgow as well, because the proposition in Glasgow some years back was for workplace parking, and that was ducked too. So none of us have a particularly good record on this, and therefore it'll be genuinely a brave minister, and it won't be a minister in the run-up to a referendum, for sure, who brings forward a package of transport measures which actually does have demand management, and not just talking about it, but actually proposing what would happen in every city across Scotland. So maybe once we get past the referendum, we could actually do what we need to do on this, and rather than just talking about it.
Many thanks. And now calling Nigel Dawn to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm very grateful, one, for the opportunity, but two, to follow some of the previous speeches. Both Tavish Scott's and Patrick Harvey's, I think, lead me in a direction which I'm very happy to follow. I think we can simply accept that the smogs of the past and the industrial pollution of the past are, as Tavish Scott's just put it, in the past. But we are now, of course, in a situation where it is demonstrably the case that most of the pollution we're looking at does come from vehicles, and I would commend to members just looking at some of the graphs which are available, which indicate quite clearly not only the daytime, which tends to be slightly more in the morning than the evening because the rush hour is a little bit more constrained, but equally the very substantial fall in any figures at all at the weekend, which indicate very clearly, I think, what we're dealing with. But I would make the point, which I don't think has yet been established, that most of the issue is actually when vehicles are stationary. It's not when they're running. Now, I accept that Patrick Harvey has a point that when you've got a motorway running across the city, there's a lot of vehicles moving, and that doesn't help. I think we have to accept that physically there. But in our major cities, it's not the vehicles that are passing by which are doing most of the damage. It's the vehicles that are actually stopping and having to then accelerate. And I think there is a solution to that, which I would like to put briefly to the Chamber. Tavish Scott spoke about tolling as if that was the only way of actually preventing vehicles from being in your city stationary. There are two things that you can do. The first is to insist that we now have modern control of our engines which automatically switch off when we stop so that they don't sit there stationary, and I think that is going to come to us, so we probably have to do very little to make it happen. But the second thing is we can actually manage traffic. We can actually stop vehicles from getting into our city centres by putting traffic lights in the way until the road ahead of them is clear so they can get through to where they're going. I had the experience very recently of trying to move through Union Street in Aberdeen at about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. Now, anybody who's tried that will know that it's something that's quite impossible. You move a few hundred yards and then you stop. But if the traffic management system, and there are plenty of lights, if the traffic management system was in such a way that I couldn't get into that space unless I could get out of that space, then actually I wouldn't be sitting there, and I wouldn't be sitting there stationary. It would make no difference to the time it took me to get through the city, but it would make a considerable difference to the time I actually was in the city, in Union Street, or in Hope Street, or in any other street that you care to mention. It can, and this, I put this very simply to folk, this can be done with traffic lights and clever management. Patrick?
Can I...
Harvey?
Thank you. Can I suggest very simply to Mr Dawn that his proposal is about moving air pollution from one place to another, not reducing the amount of it, which can only be done by running internal combustion engines less?
Your last 45 seconds, Mr Dawn.
I entirely accept there's an element of that, but I would make the point that if those vehicles are not in the particularly constrained area of high buildings and low wind speeds, then moving it is to some extent not such a bad idea, because we're talking ultimately about concentrations. And secondly, if you know that there are other routes which would be better for you, then you'll go that way. But can I add, Presiding Officer, and I am going to stop, that all the other comments that have been made about public transport are entirely appropriate. I simply haven't had time to address them, and the Presiding Officer is not going to give me time to address them. Thank you.
Environment Act 1995, which I well remember speaking in, created an obligation on each local authority to declare local air quality management areas where it found that area pollution was higher than standards, and to come up with a local air quality action plan to reduce pollution levels to within the standards. Now, 19 years later, there are 13 local authorities in Scotland that have had to declare air quality management areas, and there has been widespread failure, as Claire Baker emphasised in her speech, to achieve the pollution levels required by the local air quality action plans. And of course, since then, we've also got European obligations embodied in European directives, and we're not meeting those targets either. So this is really a very serious health issue, as several speakers have emphasised. Friends of the Earth have estimated 1,500 deaths a year because of air pollution, but of course many others are suffering from poorer health because of it, mainly in relation to respiratory and cardiovascular health. The main offenders are nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter called PM10, and fine particulate matter called PM2.5. It's a matter of concern, as again Claire Baker emphasised, that only 6 sites for the fine particulate matter are being monitored in Scotland currently. So there has to be a big increase in the monitoring of fine particulate matter, and there also have to be Scottish standards established for that, and those Scottish standards would best be based on the World Health Organization standard. The other particulates, PM10 and also nitrogen dioxide, are monitored, and I'm certainly concerned both generally and at a constituency level, because Great Junction Street in my constituency has been an air quality management area for some time, and I know that Salamander Street was high on the list for PM10 particulate matter a couple of years ago, and Claire Baker emphasised that this very day it is exceeding the levels for PM10. So clearly this is a matter of concern, I'm sure, to most of us, both at a national and a constituency level. So we need a lower emissions strategy, and I'm glad that the government's going to have one. But of course, a lower emissions strategy will not work unless it's joined up with other policy areas. So in that strategy, we need a clear timetable for action. We need to quantify the measures needed to deliver clean air. We need to have guidance to local authorities, and perhaps even a legal requirement for local authorities, as Friends of the Earth suggest. But perhaps most important of all, we need to join this up with other policy areas, and in particular transport and planning. Many people have observed today and previously about RPP2 emphasising proposals and not policies in several crucial areas, and in particular transport. And transport really has to be at the heart of action on this matter. So active travel, walking and cycling, prioritising that has to be our #1 transport demand. But of course that's not going to suit everybody. We have to be realistic about this. So when it comes to faster modes of travel, I would say cars bad, buses much better, and with due respect to some SNP members, trams best of all. I think that's where the main thrust of the policies has to be, and of course that is the responsibility of national government, crucially, as well, of course, as of local government. So my time is up. This is an important matter. I'm glad that Claire Baker has introduced it today, and I strongly support the motion in her name.
Well done. I now call on Patrick Harvey as we move to the closing speeches. 4 minutes, Mr. Harvey, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Excuse me. I began by talking about some of the ambition that was expressed back in 2005 when the Minister at the time, Rona Brankin, responded to a member's business debate. And I can only reflect now that if that ambition had been realised, my daily experience whether as a pedestrian, a cyclist or a bus user in Glasgow, would already be very different. That ambition was not realised. And I don't know whether my cynicism is because of the mood I'm in today, or because I've been here 10 years, or if I was always like this. But it seems to me pretty clear, thank you, Presiding Officer, it seems to me pretty clear that unless we see transformational change in our transport policy, we're going to be here in another decade, looking back at the speeches from today and looking at the fine ambition and wondering why it wasn't realised. And we'll have the same regret on that day, or some other group of MSPs will, as I do today. The argument on demand reduction, and I made this point during that same debate in 2005. I talked about the improvements we've seen in air quality having been driven by technology, and that was welcome. But improvements in technology would be overtaken by increasing traffic levels. Now, I know some people these days suggest that developed countries are reaching what we call peak car. Well, that might be true. It's not clear to me that it's true. It might be true. But the question is, even if it is, how long do we want to live with that astonishingly high level of road traffic demand? Unless we change that, we're not going to see some magical reduction in in problems with air quality. Now, this argument on demand reduction, I recognise, as Tavish Scott says, that it can be presented in an unpopular way. I make the case that it can be presented in a popular way as well. Demand reduction is not about supply reduction. It's about reducing people's reliance, reducing the living patterns that lock people into high demand to spend their time and to spend their money travelling about. A low transport demand policy would be so much cheaper for individuals, for businesses and for government. It's about reducing dependence. And we need to get to the point on transport policy that we've got to on energy in the home, or that we've got to in waste management. We don't discuss those subjects without thinking about demand reduction. Reduce the amount of the problem that we have to deal with, the amount of the problem that we have to pay for, and the amount of the social and environmental consequences. We need to get to that point with transport if we want to change our problems with air quality. Now, it seems to me that the Scottish Government remains reliant on what is still a hypothetical shift toward electric transport for low emissions. We don't have that fundamental desire to reduce road traffic levels and to increase walking, cycling and public transport as an alternative to what is currently on the roads. And in terms of the increased ambition for the future, particularly on PM 2.5, let's recognise that as the Friends of the Earth briefing reminds us, we're not even yet reaching the existing Scottish targets, let alone the European ones. So if we're going to improve those targets, let's improve the delivery at the same time. Finally, Presiding Officer, in closing, can I say that I won't be supporting the Government amendment or the Conservative amendment because of the amount that they delete from the original motion. I welcome the Conservatives' emphasis on climate change. I don't disagree with much of their text. I do wonder, though, whether somebody hadn't spotted that this isn't a debate about climate change, but one about local air pollution.
Many thanks. Now call on Alex Johnston. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Well, Deputy Presiding Officer, I definitely spotted that this was a debate about local air quality and not about climate change. However, we have had people here today, even Patrick Harvey, who seem to emphasise the long term and talk about climate change commitments in the hope that achieving against these targets might actually improve air quality. However, I also want to take the opportunity to talk about some of the short-term measures which the Government may already be taking, which will, or could, if adjusted, contribute towards improving air quality in some of the worst areas in Scotland. As we've all heard, it's oxides of sulphur and nitrogen and particulates that are the problem. These are often associated with diesel engines, and as such, we have to consider how we actually support transport of goods and services as well as people around our communities and through our towns. If we look, for example, at the development of the trunk road network in recent years, we have seen many more bypasses and other roads that have had the effect of taking large numbers of heavy goods vehicles out of our town centres. And many of our regional towns that happen to have trunk roads going through them have seen their circumstances significantly improved. There is more that could be done. The Government already has a programme in place for the A96. Perhaps rather more could be done for some of the communities still blighted by HGVs along the line of the A75, for example, and further consideration should be given to what can be done there. However, it's in our town centres that we still see the worst pollution and the worst impact on pedestrians and cyclists who happen to be exposed to these emissions. Now, again, the Government has gone so far along the way of improving the problems associated with buses in particular. The changes to the Bus Service Operators Grant means that fuel efficiency is now a key element of what the objective of the scheme. So vehicles with improved fuel efficiency will begin to appear on our roads. To improve that still further, the Green Bus Fund has had the effect of supporting the introduction of hybrid buses, something which again has a significant impact in our town centres, particularly where in the worst of our city polluted areas, these buses can actually run largely on electricity, so dispersing the pollutants that are currently causing the problems. But moving forward, I think we have to be more ambitious. The Government's total investment in supporting bus transport is increasingly concentrated on the concessionary travel scheme. And regardless of what else we might say about it, I don't see that the concessionary travel scheme has within it any element which is designed to reduce emissions. And as a result, I would ask that for future years, the Minister take the opportunity to lobby his colleagues to look for ways to ensure that government investment in bus transport is across the board having an impact on emissions. Of course, alternative fuels would make a difference if we could go down that road, and I will not rehearse the arguments of last week that argued that the use of gas instead of diesel, for example, would actually clean up the emissions that we have. But one of the key areas I think we need to address also, again transport related I suppose, is when we talk about the priorities for pedestrians and cyclists within our cities. Too often, pedestrians and cyclists are mixed with other road traffic and may be competing with buses and heavy goods vehicles, and of course being exposed to exhaust fumes in a very direct sense. So for the long term, I think we need to look at the investment that the Government has already placed on pedestrians and cyclists and see if we can do more to separate them from the emission-causing vehicles.
Many thanks. I call on Minister Paul Wheelhouse. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I did welcome this debate, and I certainly think it's been a constructive one for the most part today. It's recognised the importance of collective action to address air quality problems where they exist. And there have been, of course, over the last few decades, a clear and sustained reduction in levels of air pollutants of most concern to the environment. But I do take the points that have been made about some of the causes for that. But it should be recognised that it is, broadly speaking, good news for Scotland. And I hope that members do take some positives from the action that has been taken to date, as indeed Alex Johnson was referring to in his closing remarks. There are some specific points I want to refer to. I think I'll spend most of my time just referring to points that have been raised in the debate. Tavish Scott, I think it's not something I often find myself saying, but I think he was right in many respects in his speech and in terms of saying that action is most effective at a local level. That's absolutely true. And indeed, the Scottish Government does, I think, have a strong record of leadership and support in the role. And although there has been some criticism about the lack of progress or perceived lack of progress, it's worth remembering that where there are AQMAs, all of them have an action plan in place now. To a degree, it depends on the effectiveness of the delivery at a local level, and I do take that on board. But the point is there is a leadership from the top. We are putting in place action plans in all air quality management areas, and indeed we do have some successes in terms of them coming off. We can, for example, say in relation to Pathhead in Midlothian, an area that many people will have travelled through, that progress is being made. That area is interesting not because not just because of the improvement in performance there, but also because the cause of the air quality issue there is down to still use of coal and for people that have no access to gas on the grid. Because of the action that's been taken by Midlothian Council, there is a realistic prospect that that AQMA will be revoked in the near future. Also Fife Council, to pick up Cara Hilton and other members from, indeed Claire Baker from Fife. Fife Council is making excellent progress with implementation of its action plan in Cooper. It's not yet ready to come off, but we're really pleased with the level of progress in terms of pollution levels that are falling there. So that gives us hope that the process is working, that an area like Cooper can be freed from being under an AQME in the near future. Tavish Scott also mentioned the issue of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. I know it's an issue he takes a close personal interest in. We are investing £14 million over the next 2 years in electric vehicles. And so there is some investment going in. We clearly do have an imperative to try and move the Scottish Government's own fleet to EVs and hybrids. It's not an easy process trying to evaluate which models are the best and most effective at good value for the taxpayer is obviously a key consideration, but I can give them a commitment we are trying to do that. And indeed, well, I don't know specifically about Shetland whether there are electric vehicle charging points. I recently visited the Western Isles and saw one in Castle Bay in Barra and one in Stornoway, and I know the Council actively uses its vehicles, and I commend them for doing so to get from one end of the island group to the other. So that's great progress. Marco Biaggi, I think, raised a number of good points in relation to things that we don't have under our control in terms of vehicle emission standards. And indeed, there is progress being made at European level. It's slower than we'd like. It's worth recognising that while there has been massive growth in traffic, the point that Patrick Harvey picked up in his speech, some of that has been offset by emission standards and vehicles improving. And we would hope to see that continue. I would just merely say that while the focus of the amendment, which I do support in sympathy with the principle behind the amendment that the Greens have moved today, I cannot support in practice because of the wording of it. But we would highlight that we want to reduce the emissions of vehicles, not necessarily the traffic levels. So if we can get emissions down, reduce emission levels, which I think is probably what he's aiming for, we'll hopefully be on the same page. I do take Marco Biaggi's point that we need to aim for 10 out of 10, I think, rather than 9 or 8 out of 10, and I think that's an important point. Malcolm Chisholm also referred to actions that we could be taking and made some specific points. Just to remind the Chamber what I said in my opening remarks, amongst the key proposals we are currently developing for further consultation does incorporate provisional PM 2.5 objectives into regulations, placing a legal obligation on local authorities to monitor this important pollutant. So I hope that addresses one of the points he raised in his speech, and amongst other measures. Claire Baker, I think I've addressed the point in terms of all local authorities with air quality hotspots have action plans, so I do take the point that she was making, but we are demonstrating leadership and coordinated action between local and national government in terms of making sure we coordinate our efforts on supporting those local authorities that are doing good work in Fife and elsewhere to try and tackle the problem they have. I'm running out of time, I've only got half a minute left, I'm afraid. Just to pick up other points that were made, Gordon MacDonald, I think, made very good points on behalf of his constituents and indeed on behalf of Colin Keir in relation to Edinburgh Western as well. Clearly, I've said in a number of PQ responses to Gordon MacDonald that air quality should be a consideration in the planning process, just like noise and other potential nuisance factors. And I would hope local authorities, in preparing their local development plans, do take these matters into account and take detailed evidence on major proposals. I won't comment on the specifics, but I think you'll understand why, but I think it's an important consideration. Presiding Officer, air quality is important to supporting a good quality of life, supporting individuals and communities' health and well-being. We have, I feel, made good progress. I do listen to members about the points they raise about the genuine concerns that we need to do more. I do welcome, if there are positive proposals that come forward from members around the Chamber about other actions you think we should be taking, I will happily listen to them and see what we can do together in a consensual way. But success can only be achieved in partnership. That's partnership between central government and local government, partnership between the parties in the Chamber, so we can depoliticise what is a very important issue for the health and well-being of our communities. And I only give the commitment that the Scottish Government is committed to supporting action at local and national levels, and I welcome the support of others to achieve ongoing success. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Now call on Claudia Beamish to close the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be able to speak today on this extremely important issue of air quality in support of Claire Baker's motion. While Scotland is not blighted, as we have heard, by levels of pollution seen in some other industrial parts of the world and with heavy industry, air pollution remains, according to Friends of the Earth, Scotland's greatest environmental health threat. We remain below the air quality standards, as we've heard, set by Scottish Government and the EU, and certain urban areas in Scotland, many of which make up the most deprived parts of the country, have for many years been below the legal standards. According to Friends of the Earth, as we have heard from other speakers, fine particles are responsible for an equivalent of over 1,500 deaths each year, and these and other health impacts are not only from the direct breathing of polluted air, but it's also suggested by Friends of the Earth that the contamination of the food chain can be affected as well. The levels of air pollution in certain hotspots are indeed over the safe threshold set by the World Health Organization. To tackle this very serious issue, the Scottish Government must ensure that the low-emission strategy is a firm, overarching policy linked to other policy planning areas such as transport and energy. And Friends of the Earth again have recommended setting deadlines by which time that the air quality standards might be met. And I would ask the Scottish Government to give serious consideration to this in terms of implementing targets with careful monitoring in the same way as those which have been set by the Climate Change Act. The Rural Affairs Committee, in looking at the National Planning Framework 3, has requested that there be the inclusion of air quality issues in the final MPF3 statement and by the Government, and I hope the Minister will also consider this. We have heard about the RPP2, and colleagues have raised the weakness of the emission standards in relation to a lot of the issues after 2020 being only about proposals rather than policies. And I hope that the Minister will take this into account in looking at the correlation between climate change targets and emissions targets. Members will remember that the ex-First Minister Jack McConnell had a particular focus on environmental justice in his time in office. And at the 202 Earth Summit in Johannesburg, he discussed the responsibility of developed nations such as ours in relation to the global challenge of climate change. The reason I'm bringing this up in the debate today about air pollution in Scotland is that in Scotland itself, environmental justice is to be seen in the local sense along with social justice in relation to air pollution. And it should not be communities who are affected, who are deprived communities that should bear the brunt of this. As we have heard this afternoon, there are many communities who are affected, and this is a cause for concern. And it is the responsibility of all of us here to implement the policies to alleviate this impact. Cara Hilton, in her contribution, raises a concern about parts of her Dunfermline constituency and highlights serious health issues and grave concerns. And Marco Biaggi rightly stressed the noxious nature of poor air. He argued that local authorities must take responsibility, but I hope he agrees they need to have the robust support and guidance of Scottish Government. And Malcolm Chisholm, in his remarks, stressed the need for guidance from Scottish Government. Along with other partners, such as local authorities, the Scottish Government does need to promote policies which will work towards a low-carbon economy, and measures have already been taken around by a range of public bodies, organisations and companies throughout the country. But there does need to be coherence, and this is the responsibility of Scottish Government. We've heard about Lothian buses and hybrid vehicles. We've heard about the Scottish Transport Emissions Partnership argues that a good point when they propose that rather than being a source of emissions, which could be cut down, one bus can, in theory, replace 76 cars on the road. And additionally, the lower speed of buses means lower emissions. The Scottish Government's Green Bus Fund is welcome, but cutting down the use of cars and demand reduction are essential. And there are a lot of good examples of car clubs, for instance, including in Dumfries and Dunbar, not just in big cities, and these are a way of cutting emissions, as are walking buses for children travelling to school. Still, an even better solution, as some members have highlighted today, is that of active travel. And I was pleased to see Stop Climate Chaos Scotland's calls for an increase in the budget, where at least has been met by Scottish Government, but I feel more still needs to be done, and Alex Johnson stressed this in his remarks. As a country, we should be promoting local food chains as well and cutting down emissions created through transport. Our choices as individuals and households can collectively make a difference, and the Scottish Government's awareness raising for behaviour or culture changes are key here. As Patrick Harvey said, we must reduce demand. I actually want to emphasise that if the Scottish Government is not able to take forward this strategy for dealing with air pollution in a coherent way, that we may be, as Patrick Harvey says, in another decade's time having the same debate, and we owe it to the communities of Scotland to make sure that this doesn't happen. And I take the point the Minister's saying that it is all our responsibilities, but the Minister is in government at the moment, and while we work with him, in the end, the air pollution strategy is the responsibility of Scottish Government. And we look forward to hearing more about timescales and about detail for taking this issue forward for all our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the debate on air quality in Scotland, and it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 9293 in the name of Joanne Lamont on women in Scotland. I'd invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I would invite Joanne Lamont to speak to and move the motion. When you're ready, you have 10 minutes, please. We are very tight for time today, so if everyone could stick to the advised time, we'd be very grateful. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And if I don't use up my whole 10 minutes, I hope it will therefore afford other people the opportunity to contribute to what I think is an important debate. And can I move the motion in my name in starting? It is a great privilege to open this debate on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party. We chose this debate because we wanted to afford the opportunity for us all across the Chamber to mark International Women's Day and to reflect on the progress and achievements of women and the challenges women still face in Scotland, throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. And I want to congratulate all those in the Scottish Women's Convention in this Chamber on Saturday and those who organised events across the country to mark International Women's Day, who took the opportunity to come together to acknowledge how different our lives as women are now to the lives of our mothers, and how much more needs to be done if our daughters and generations beyond are to have equality, freedom from violence and the right to achieve their potential. And I know that right across Scotland there were very interesting events happening. And we are, of course, happy to accept the amendment in the Scottish Government's name and to join with others in our sympathies and condolences to the families of Ailsa-McKay, taken from us all too soon, a woman of great wisdom, a woman who could challenge and think outside the box in the way that we all so desperately need. We know that Ailsa was a driving force with other women in insisting that we needed to understand budgets and the economy properly, to confront the way that the impact on women of specific choices was ignored, and insist that we should address the decisions made that have compounded the problems that women faced. And Ailsa said in a speech recently, "Women stand up and say this discipline of economics is failing us. We are dismissed as only women and we don't understand the numbers. I'm an economist who doesn't do numbers, which again makes me quite a lone ranger in my own discipline. Not because I can't do numbers, but because I refuse to do numbers, because I think we've got the underlying philosophy wrong to start with. So before we start counting things, we need to work out what it is that we're trying to count, what we value and what we should value, so the numbers come after that." Such wise words on the way that we should take our politics forward and our debating forward in this chamber. And of course, I think that comment reflects on something that we all wrestle with. We know that budgets reflect our priorities more than our words of concern ever will. And there is this abiding conundrum. Do we value what women do less because women do it, or do women do these things because society does not value them properly? And I think that speaks to the very heart of the kind of world that we want to live in. And in reflecting on that, we need also, I think, to challenge ourselves that in tackling inequality facing women, we have a full understanding of women's lives and the pressures that are on them. And I am proud of the Labour Party record in tackling these issues on the kinds of things that we addressed when we were in government with it, UK level, at Scottish level and at local government level. But we do not pretend that it is a matter entirely for the province of one party, but it is something that must concern us all. Because International Women's Day is a day of great ambivalent feelings for me, and I'm sure these are ambivalent feelings shared by others, because it does afford the opportunity to celebrate the progress we have made, but it's also a time to reflect on the burdens still placed on women here and abroad. where women still disproportionately represent low-paid workers, carers, who take the burden of the real pressures within our communities, where women still face violence and intimidation in their own homes, where we know that no matter how clever our girls are, how overachieving they are in the classroom, they are not represented in equal numbers in the boardroom where the big decisions are made. And we also know that across the world, women are denied economic opportunities, where girls are denied the simple right to an education, and the testimony of Malala Yousafzai stands as a great inspiration to us all, but where girls are denied education, an opportunity to achieve their potential, where in some parts of the world, rape is still a weapon of war, and where the most risky thing you can be is to be a woman. So in those circumstances, there is an ambivalence which should drive our ambitions forward. But there is, of course, progress to be celebrated and women to be praised. Those like Ailsa-McKay and Inspiration Tall, those who established Glasgow Women's Aid 40 years ago, who identified need and found the solutions, and who over the intervening period have insisted that society listen to the scourge that is domestic violence and listen to them on the solutions that would address that. Women who have redefined politics and as a consequence reshaped the world. Women who inspire. Women who inspire because of their courage and their humility, giving voice to suffering and solutions to those in pain. Women who have held families together, communities together. Women who, as we speak, are the ones who are driving community activity, running housing associations, taking on the activity where work needs to be done, staffing the food banks, staffing the places where people are in pain. We celebrate too the women who demanded equal representation, that created a place like this where women can stand as equals, speaking out for their communities. And at every step we understand these women face resistance, the need to persuade, to organise, the need to change minds, and where you can't change minds, change the structures. And that is the message. We must persuade, but we also put in place measures that make sure that women come through. And of course, it is interesting, I think, that in the independence debate, I, like others, am often asked why women are less likely to support independence. And I have to confess, I don't know the answer to that. But I shall resist any notion that it is about some deficit in women, that somehow women are less bold or less radical, or indeed on the other side, that reaffirms a stereotypical view of women, that they are more concerned about their families than others, that they are more concerned about budgets than men, they are more risk-averse. None of these explanations of how women vote should be ones that we should hold to in a world where we believe women can achieve their full potential. Because there will be another time to debate the independence question, but here I think we can agree that the huge issues facing women here and abroad are deeper than any constitutional arrangements and must be addressed with political will, regardless of what the constitutional settlement might be. But I also know that not one step on the road to greater equality for women was ever handed over without a battle. So whatever the constitutional settlement is in September, it will not mean that women's lives will be better, because that argument must always be made in its own context. So we celebrate and we reflect, but we also resolve to continue to highlight inequality and demand change. And I think one of the key features of progress for women has been the connection between ambition and practical delivery. It can be, for some of us, a dialogue of despair when you actually identify the challenge that women face. But we have to have a determination to change. Our systems were not overwhelmed in the past when they faced the challenges that women's lives were, and we must build on that and have the confidence that actually it is possible. If you connect aspiration with practical delivery, you can make a difference. The fact that women disproportionately are low paid led to a debate and an argument that created the national minimum wage, that we understood the direct experience of violence against women and the underlying cause and the abuse of power, led to the creation of Women's Aid, of rape crisis centres, of the Zero Tolerance campaign, of demands for change in the justice system, which brought about hope for women. These were not created by the state, but by women coming together. And the job of us as politicians, I believe, is to give voice and support to organisations which will again address that need. Whether it was under-representation in the Parliament and winning the argument for positive action, and whether it is indeed the right for women to work and as a consequence the need for childcare to support women into work. But we also have to be acutely aware it's not enough to provide if women cannot access that care. And that's the debate I think we're now in around childcare, preschool, after school, in holiday time and so on. Indeed, where the state can provide care that women in working lives doesn't allow them to access needs to be addressed. And that we don't even have to go as far as the question of job segregation and the issue of parenting and the role of men in the lives of their children, which I would argue has been transformed in my lifetime. And so now we have to test policy too and its consequence. Not enough to say we care, but to address the policy options that we've got. And I was disappointed this morning to learn that in committee we have voted down the possibility of using the living wage through a procurement process to ensure that people have very little time left. But to vote that down, when we know that 64% of those earning less than the living wage are women, then when we make a decision to invest in full-time college places, we have to understand the consequences being borne by women who need part-time places because of the caring responsibilities and their ability to learn. Where cuts in local government in public services mean that women workers are stretched and the gaps that come in the provision are delivered by women. The solutions to these are not for one party, but we have to at least acknowledge the challenge that they present and resolve to do more. We should draw on the strength and abilities of women, not about manifesto offers, but developing policy with women themselves. Be bold in positive action measures, not to do a women a favour, but to tilt the playing field back to level, which disproportionately benefits men as it stands. But always be alive to the impact on women's lives of decisions that are made, because ultimately, in freeing women, we create a better society that is better and fairer for our daughters and our sons. I move the motion in my name.
Many thanks. I remind the Chamber we're very tight for time, and I call Angela Constance to speak to and move Amendment 9293.1 in the name of Shona Robison. Minister, maximum 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start my contribution today by paying tribute to the feminist economist Ailsa-McKay, who we lost last week. Ailsa was a friend and advisor to both ministers and officials in the Scottish Government and was highly respected internationally as well as here in Scotland. She was truly passionate about the work she did. She was highly regarded by us all and an absolute expert on equality matters, and in particular in relation to gender. And as a member of both the Strategic Group on Women in Work and the Equality Budget Advisory Group, she did not hesitate to remind us of the commitment we have made as a government to equality, and it is now incumbent upon us all to continue with the work that she believed in so very strongly. As Joanne Lamont says, International Women's Day is both an opportunity to celebrate the achievements and the contributions of women, but it's also a stark reminder of the challenges that women continue to face, both home and abroad. And the challenges are many and varied, and include violence against women, and this government, like previous administrations, views violence against women as both a cause and consequence of gender inequality. We are internationally respected for our understanding of violence against women and our approach and our work in this area. And it's important that Parliament knows that the new Violence Against Women strategy is currently in development and is due to be published in June. Now, according to last month's labour market statistics, there are now more women in Scotland in work today than at any time since the current records began in 1992. Women's access to employment opportunities is important not just because of the impact on their personal circumstances and choices, but also because of the effect on the country's future growth. There, of course, is still much to do to improve the plight of women in work and to get more women into work. And I was very struck by a conversation I had with young mums last week when I visited one-parent families Scotland at a project in Motherwell, who said that they are still routinely asked at job interviews if they have children and if they have childcare arrangements, something that is utterly unacceptable. So that's why the recommendations made at the Women's Employment Summit are important, and we continue to progress this work with the oversight of an expert group which I chair.
And an update of that work was jointly published by the Scottish Government and the STUC last week, and I would urge members to have a look at that update. One of the areas the summit looked at very closely was women in enterprise. In Scotland, only 21% of small to medium-sized enterprise employers are led solely by women. And figures show that if women in Scotland were to start businesses at the same rate as men, we could see economic growth at 5.3%. And this is a huge increase and confirms how important this work is. An additional support and investment was announced last week, along with the publication of the Women in Enterprise framework, which is very much about reducing the gap in enterprise. We are, of course, Presiding Officer, delivering more modern apprenticeship opportunities than ever before, and women now make up 43% of all new starts. But we very much recognise that more has to be done to ensure that the modern apprenticeship programme is properly balanced and accurately reflects Scottish society. We want to see more men in childcare, and we want to see more women in STEM-related frameworks. And this week is Make Young People Your Business in ICT and Digital Technologies, and a very focused part of this campaign is to attract more women and young women into STEM sectors, because crucially tackling occupational segregation is key also to tackling the gap in pay. And I will take one very brief intervention.
Thank the Minister for giving way. Will she take the opportunity of this debate to look at the fact that there are 80,000 less women in our colleges since 2007 and actually commit to reviewing that and see if there are more part-time places or if there's anything she can do about getting more women back into college?
Minister.
Of course, the Cabinet Secretary only very recently announced more funding for more part-time courses and more childcare and places for women. But it is important to remember that women are not in the minority in our college sector. The majority of college students are women. And in the context of college reforms, I think it is important, it's very important to have the balance here, because if we're serious about occupational segregation, we do need to be getting more women into full-time courses or recognised qualifications, for qualifications that, forgive me, are more economically relevant and that will actually lead to employment. That, of course, has to be balanced. It's helpful if you listen to it all. Has to be balanced with women who are at different points in their own life and who need access to different sorts of learning and different sorts of courses to enable them on their journey back into education and back into work. And it's important to remember, Presiding Officer, that the majority of college places are indeed part-time. In the time that I've got left, Presiding Officer, I want to focus on public life, because we also know that there is much more that we can do to encourage women to feel equipped and to participate in wider public life. In our equality outcome, we aim for public boards to be more diverse, broadly reflecting the general population by 2017. So we are taking opportunities within current powers to start to make a difference. And there would be further opportunities if equality legislation was our responsibility. And my colleague, Shona Robison, Minister for Commonwealth Games and Sport and Equalities, wrote to Jo Swinson MP in October last year to propose that Holyrood be given legislative powers over women's representations. Jo Swinson responded, inviting the Scottish Government to put forward its detailed proposals for how it would use those powers to improve women's representation, and we will be pleased to do so. We will now consult on the issue of women's representation and on the use of quotas to ensure that, if a decision was made to take mandatory steps to achieve gender balance, the legislation would be as effective as possible. I don't have time, Presiding Officer, to talk about childcare, other than to say that for the first time ever, we now have a plan to achieve universal childcare in this country. And as an Employment Minister, I know how important it is to have control not only of education but also to have control of our economic levers if we are indeed to make Scotland a more equal place.
I must notify members now that I think we are losing a member from this debate. Mary Scanlon, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can I first of all thank the Labour Party for using their time to talk about the role of women in Scotland, and can I associate the Conservatives with everything that's been said about Ailsa-McKay, and also commend Johann Lamont for a very passionate, well-considered speech. When we last debated women in work in December, I began by citing some statistics about gender equality among elected members of this Parliament. But given that, Presiding Officer, this is my last week as a corporate body member, I would like to pay tribute to the drive towards greater gender balance for security officers in this Parliament, as this role has traditionally been highly male-dominated. It's very easy for us as parliamentarians to preach to others, but I think that we've led by example on achieving much improved gender balance of security officers here in our Parliament. The day this Parliament opened in May 1999, 16% of the security officers were women, and now 15 years later 41% of our Parliament's security staff are female. And in 1999 there was one female manager in security. Now we have 3 out of 8, and our head of security is female. And I would like to thank them all today, male and female, for the thoroughly professional approach to security, which is something that we can easily take for granted. Thank you. I'd now like to turn to statistics about gender equality in education. And as Jenny Marriage has said, in academic year 2005-06, there were 257,000 female enrolments at college. 7 years later, this figure stands at 155. That's a reduction of 39.5% in the number of full-time, part-time and short-duration courses undertaken by women. Tellingly, this downward trend began in 2007-08, and it's fallen without fail every year since. So while this has affected women of all ages, those between 25 and 59 have been hit particularly hard compared to 2007. There are now 47% or 50,000 fewer female adult learners in further education. By way of comparison, the male figure has fallen by half as much, from 65 to 41,000. So given this, I find it hard to take the Scottish Government seriously when it talks about of harnessing independence to boost female employment in this country to Swedish levels, mainly because they focused almost exclusively on one side of the coin, childcare, when in reality there is another equally important problem to be addressed, and that is the number of women without formal qualifications. And although, as others have said, 2 out of 12 new regional board college chairs are female and 31% of university board members are women, I do think we have first-class college principals in the further education sector, and I think Paul Little is one of the few males, the principal of Glasgow University. I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll move on fairly quickly. But the RSE found that 27% of female STEM graduates secure a permanent position in their area, compared to 52% of males. So that means that 56,000 female STEM graduates in Scotland, just over 15,000 continue to work in the sector after university. And also Skills Development Scotland revealed that in the first 3 quarters of last year, there were 1,665 new engineering starts and 79 were female, 5%. And depressingly, engineering can be exchanged for construction, transport and other sectors. So I think I'll just come to conclusion now, Presiding Officer. Education, I firmly believe, is one of the front lines, and while I'm pleased to report that we've made progress in recent years, there's no doubt that we've still got a lot to do, and if we are to achieve our ultimate aim in ensuring equality of opportunity for all Scotland's children, that must start with with greater access to education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very tight for time, as I've indicated. Christina McKelvey to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm. Speeches of less than 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Many of you in this chamber would have supported the motion that I put forward last week, paying tribute to the late Professor Ailsa-McKay. As Professor of Economics at Glasgow Caledonian University, Ailsa was a founding member of both the Scottish Women's Budget Group and the European Gender Budget Network. She was also a member of the International Association of Feminist Economists. Her commitment to promoting a new government policy approach to gender equality has played a major part in where we are now, quite literally. This horseshoe-shaped chamber was proposed by women because it was seen as being less adversarial than the face-to-face confrontation style like the House of Commons, a creche, family-friendly working hours, encouraging more women to stand for election as MSPs are positive actions towards better gender balance. As a feminist and an economist, one of Ailsa's drivers was the concept that women weren't some kind of add-on that you could pour into the mix and stir and get a result. Women approach and use resources in fundamentally different ways from men, and as Ailsa put it, the Scottish Women's Budget Group have continually pointed out how the different needs and resources available to men and women will affect the way they access everything from jobs to public services such as housing, transport, education and training. And by taking account of these differences in policy, policymakers can ensure better policy targeting, more effective delivery and greater equality. The economic contribution of women in Norway, for instance, given that we're talking a lot about oil revenue today, is far greater than the contribution of oil resources in Norway. That's an amazing statistic. Childcare in the UK is very expensive. It works out, according to a recent report by the Family and Childcare Trust, at about £7,500 a year. That covers a 2-year-old at nursery for 25 hours a week and a 5-year-old in an after-school club. The figures work out at slightly more than the cost of the average mortgage that, according to official statistics, costs £7,207 a year. The authors of this report say the childcare system isn't working for anyone. But other countries seem to provide excellent facilities. Sweden, for example, is often upheld as a great example. But how do they manage to afford it? The answer is not difficult. The Swedes afford it because the return on the investment is far more women in work, generating more wealth and taxes, and thus paying for better public services like childcare. This Scottish Government's way forward in tackling gender equality and maximising the contribution of this nation's incredibly talented, ambitious and able women is to put them at the centre. This is where the Government's commitment to transformational childcare came from, real women and real families with a real desire to give their children the best possible chance. And we won't be kidding anyone if we don't pay further tribute to Ailsa-McKay in pushing that agenda and giving information to the Scottish Government and absolutely pushing the idea forward. The only way to grow your economy is to give the women of this country the best opportunities possible. If you have a situation like that where you do have more women in work paying taxes and paying into the system, the tax revenues can be boosted by £700 million a year in an independent Scotland. With women joining the workforce at a similar level to Sweden, there will be another 35,000 jobs in childcare as a result. By the end of the first independent Scottish Parliament, every 3- and 4-year-old and vulnerable 2-year-old will be entitled to 1,140 hours of childcare a year, the equivalent of 30 hours a week in term time.
Begin to conclude, please.
Let's create the best possible tribute to Professor Ailsa-McKay. Let's have the best childcare possible in our independent Scotland. We cannot do it now because we would be denied by Westminster the access to the revenues collected from the economic boost it would give us. In an independent Scotland, we can. We should and we must.
Thank you, Malcolm Chisholm, to be followed by Maureen Watt.
Sir, I'd like to start, like others, by paying tribute to Ailsa-McKay. I remember knowing her when I was on the Equal Opportunities Committee, and she was an advisor to us when we were doing gender budgeting, and clearly she made an enormous contribution to work in that area, and indeed to feminist economics more generally. So I think we should all pay tribute to her work for Scotland in general and the Scottish Parliament in particular. Today, as Joanne Lamont emphasised, we're celebrating the progress that's been made, but also recognises there's still a great deal more to do. And Joanne Lamont also, of course, emphasised the importance of women coming together to lead action in this area. And that, of course, is what has happened over the last 3 or 4 decades in particular, with significant results. I've been aware, for example, of the importance of groups like Zero Tolerance Rape Crisis and Scottish Women's Aid in relation to progress on highlighting the problem of violence against women and taking action against it. I've known in my own constituency the importance of women coming together many years ago in the Greater Pilton Childcare Action Group, and that group of women taught me most of what I know about the importance of childcare. And now, of course, we've got new campaigns starting from a younger generation of feminists, such as Everyday Sexism Project and No More Page 3, and they're beginning to have a very significant influence as well. And I think in this situation, the role of men really is to listen to those women, to learn from them and support the necessary action. And as a Labour MSP and MP before that, I'm also lucky to have had several Labour women who, in a sense, have been part of those movements. Harriet Harman when I was at Westminster, Joanne Lamont in my early years in the Scottish Parliament, and now, of course, a younger generation of feminists such as Kes Dugdale and Jenny Mara, who are leading the charge. So certainly I have learned from those people and hope I can go on supporting them on the issues which they have highlighted. I think I have a kind of very personal impetus now which reinforces my determination to take action on gender inequality, and that's because I've now got 2 young granddaughters, and I do not want to see them growing up in a world where gender inequality persists, where they're subjected to the misogyny of lad culture, where they may have to face the horrors of violence against women, and when they are likely to face the economic disadvantage that women as a whole, clearly not all women, but women as a generality face relative to men. When it comes to violence against women, a report just came this week from the European Union, and the horrific figure was given of 44% of women in the UK saying they'd experienced physical and/or sexual violence after the age of 15. And we, of course, repeatedly see reports that give similar kind of figures. Across Europe, it was 1 in 20 women who had been raped. So prevention is clearly important in the violence agenda. I welcome the police campaign, We Can Stop It, that can start this week, but clearly the wider issues of socialisation and stereotyping in the bringing up of young children is absolutely central to this, and a small but significant example of that was the motion entitled Ban Bossy from Kes Dugdale this week. One example of the socialisation of girls discouraging them from taking leadership roles. But of course, central to this as well as women's economic advantage, and those who've highlighted the cause of violence against women, for example, have placed it in the wider inequalities in society, and that, of course, crucially involves economic disadvantage in general, earning 15% less than men. The majority of those, not all, of course, in low-paid work are women. Many women not working at all because of the absence of childcare, and I'm glad we're all beginning to talk more about childcare in this Parliament, and of course pensions, personal pensions for women, 62% of those of men. So that economic disadvantage has to be addressed, as well as those issues of the socialisation of men in particular, which must urgently be addressed.
Unfortunately, as everyone's gone over time, it's unlikely I can call everyone in the debate unless the next 3 speakers take a bit less time. Maureen Watt, to be followed by Margaret McCulloch.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also begin by paying tribute to the work in promoting women's issues by Professor Ailsa-McKay and regret her all too early passing. Her wise counsel will be sorely missed by many. Joanne Lamont, in her speech and indeed in the body of the motion, mentions the conference organised by the Women's Convention to mark International Women's Day, and this was just one of many events around the country. I had the good fortune to attend on Friday the conference organised by Aberdeen University entitled Inspiring Women, It's a Woman's World. The event was hosted by Vice Principal Professor Neva Haytes, who is responsible for equality and diversity at Aberdeen University. The university has a goal to be the beacon for gender equality, and judging by the lineup of speakers last Friday, they are certainly taking it seriously, as the day was just the beginning of a series of projects to promote women and their successes. One of the principal speakers, formerly of this parish as Chief Scientific Advisor to the Scottish Government and now to the President of the European Commission, Anne Glover, put in context the change that had already occurred, but in her view there had not been enough change and that the rate was far too slow. She said that, among other things, we had to identify what women-friendly workplaces should look like so that organisations know what they should be striving for. It's interesting that Professor Glover now works for the Commission. Recently, the Commission marked European Equal Pay Day, which this year was the 28th of February, representing the 59 days women in Europe work for free. Put the other way, the average difference between men's and women's hourly earnings stands at around 16%. So I'm glad that the Commission is currently looking at options for action at a European level to improve pay transparency, which would tackle the pay gap and help to put the principle of equal pay into practice. I think the oil and gas industry, as Christina McKelvey mentioned, should take note because it has traditionally been notorious for its pay gap. But to be fair to the industry, they are beginning to take note that they must do better at attracting young women as well as men into industry. And the two speakers at the conference who are high flyers in BP said that the engagement with women has to begin pre-14 years old, and that parents had a role to play in encouraging their daughters to aim higher. Also at the conference was the Honourable Gail Prudenti, an alumni of Aberdeen University, who is Chief Administrative Judge for New York State Unified Court System. She's responsible for a budget of over $2 billion, 3,600 judges and 15,000 other staff. And she stressed, noting her pamphlet here, the importance of mentoring in helping women progress their careers. Presiding Officer, there's a lot of very good work going on in this field of promoting equality, and it's already showing dividends with more women in employment. And the work that is being done by the Scottish Government, businesses and the trade unions together is helping this along, and I'm sure with better childcare it will be even better. And we should also recognise the Scottish Government funding in helping women in other countries into work and running their own businesses. Finally, Presiding Officer, I thought this debate might be consensual, but the Labour Party really should stop playing politics with procurement. In committee today, the DFM offered to enter dialogue with the opposition on the living wage, even given the European Commission's advice, and they refused it by their vote.
I now call Margaret McCulloch to be followed by Claire Adamson.
In beginning, could I associate myself with the sentiments that have been expressed since news reached us about the sad death of Professor Ailsa-McKay. She was an advisor to the Equal Opportunities Committee of this Parliament, just one of the roles in which she contributed her thoughts and analysis on the position of women in Scotland. I know her contributions will be missed across the Chamber. Presiding Officer, we recently marked International Women's Day, an opportunity to celebrate the social, political and economic achievements of women, an opportunity to reflect on how far we have come and how further we have to go. For all the progress that we have made as a society, gender inequality persists. Still today we have a pay gap in this country. Women in full-time work earn 13% less than men, and part-time work is 32%. And still we see that the labour market can be heavily gendered, with a disproportionate number of women in low-paid sectors. It's now over 100 years since the first International Women's Day. Back in 1911, when it was first recognised, 1 million people rallied across Europe to demand votes for women, the right for women to stand for public office and equal pay. Today we still celebrate International Women's Day, and the best way to honour the legacy of the generations who came before us and campaigned so that women could sit in parliaments like this one as equals is to challenge inequalities we face today and craft a fairer future for generations to come. More jobs, better jobs, fair pay, women's representations where decisions are made in government, in business and across society, equality of opportunity for women, for all and forever. The decisions we take here in this Parliament affect women's lives, and the votes of undecided women will be critical in deciding the results of this year's referendum. Women tell us they want facts and that they want reasoned arguments before they make up their minds. We owe it to women, indeed we owe it to everyone, to conduct the debate in a way which meets their best expectations. And that's why I want to turn to childcare. The SNP White Paper says, under the Westminster system, families in Scotland have waited too long for the provision of adequate and fair childcare. Presiding Officer, under this government, families in Scotland have waited too long for the provision of adequate and fair childcare. They are only now meeting the pledges made in 2007, and pressure from Scottish Labour showed that they could start to deliver the White Paper commitments with the powers this Parliament already has. They simply decided not to for the best part of 7 years. They also set out why they believe that only with the powers of independence could they capture tax income from a rise in female participation in the workforce due to their childcare policy, which they placed at £700 million. But it's a figure that IFS have expressed doubt over. Now Tom Gordon from the Herald has published a letter from the Scottish Government confirming that there has been no economic modelling to support the claims in the White Paper. Scotland's women and Scotland's families deserve better. Presiding Officer, on International Women's Day, we all reflected on how the empowerment of women has helped shape the Scotland we live in today. What happens in this year's referendum will shape the Scotland of the future. We owe women a good, reasoned, factual debate. That is why we have to interrogate the unproven assertions in the White Paper. But it's also why, between now and September, I will be making the clear, positive, rational case for devolution, the best of both worlds, pooling resources while sharing power, home rule without separation, a stronger Scotland and a lasting partnership with our friends and neighbours across the United Kingdom. We don't agree on everything across the Chamber, but let's at least agree to give women the principled, good quality debate they deserve. Thank you.
Many thanks. And finally, I call Claire Adamson. My apologies to Christian Allard for being unable to call him.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I confirm I have 4 minutes, Presiding Officer?
You do indeed have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, anyone visiting my parliamentary office in this building will see in prominent display one of what I believe is the most powerful messages about women. It is a Mind the Gap poster of a scowling young girl beside a smiling young boy, and the caption reads, "Prepare your daughter for working life. Pay her less pocket money than your son." Unfortunately, this is so true for women in Scotland. It is shocking that over 40 years since the Equal Pay Act was passed, women are still paid on average less than their male counterparts. The most recent report from the UK's Office of National Statistics in December 2013 makes alarming reading. In the UK, the gender pay gap has widened from 9.5% to 10% for full-time workers, and for part-time employees, it's even wider, going from 19.6% to 19.7%. These figures are truly shocking, and is just one example, alongside many, like women's representation in politics, women's representation in the STEM professions, and the number of women in senior positions in the workplace that demonstrate that we are a long way off from achieving gender equality. And it is a problem that affects women at every level, in every sector. Our professions, our scientists, technologists, women in every sphere of employment in Scotland have the potential to be, I don't have time, to be subject to this blatant discrimination. Encouraged by Professor Anne Glover, now Chief Scientific Advisor to the President of the European Commission, the Royal Society of Edinburgh established a working group chaired by the eminent astrophysicist Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell. The Royal Society of Edinburgh 2012 paper, Tapping All Our Talents, is a cohesive and comprehensive strategy aimed at increasing both the proportion of women in the workplace qualified in STEM and the number who rise to senior positions in universities, in our research institutions, in government, business and in industry. The report states, Women who do remain in the STEM workforces are still segregated by occupation in horizontal segregation and grade, vertical segregation. These forms of segregation significantly impact on both a woman's ability to achieve her potential and her earning capacity. The number of women who advance to the most senior positions in STEM remains proportionately much smaller than that of their male counterparts. It is an excellent report and acknowledges that there has to be significant cultural change to tackle this problem. And in its many recommendations, it calls on both the Scottish Government, business and our educational establishments to address the issues around gender inequality and the pay gap. This is so important, Presiding Officer, because if we don't get this right, the consequences are very clear for all to see.
Final minute.
Last week, South Lanarkshire Council agreed a settlement in their equal pay claims for 3,000 individuals, many of whom are women. The failure to implement the Equal Pay Act has led to women being denied the wage for the work that they have been undertaking. 20 years in the making, this problem will now see an average payout in the region of 25,000 people. This is a life-changing amount of money for many, but it should have been life-changing for those women over the years of their working lives. And I am so very sorry that for some who have sadly died in the interim, they will not benefit from this settlement. Failure to act has stored up a problem for the Labour Council, who will now have to find £75 million to settle claims, money that should have already been paid out over the intervening years, with much less potential to the detriment of frontline services in the South Lanarkshire area. There is no doubt women do have the most to gain from independence.
Thank you very much. Once again, apologies to Christian Allard. We now turn to the closing speeches and I call on Annabel Goldie. Maximum 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Johann Lamont for bringing this debate to the Chamber and also, if I may say so, for what I thought was a very thoughtful and reflective speech. I think she set the mood and the tone of the debate, sometimes sombre in her remarks, but also remarks which were full of hope and redolent of opportunity. And she rightly referred to the challenges of which we are all aware. I think she made a very profound observation when she said that the challenges women face today in Scotland, I think, are deeper than any constitutional arrangement. I agree with that, and I think to pretend otherwise is trite. Angela Constance, if I may say so, I thought also made a very positive comment when she referred to International Women's Day and said it is an opportunity, and she's right, and you only have to look at how that initiative has proceeded over the years to realise just how rich the opportunities are. But she also rightly pointed out it is a stark reminder of the challenges that we face. Encouragingly, she referred to there being more women in work in Scotland than has been the case for a very long time, and I think we all take pleasure from that. I can mischievously point out that's all been possible within the partnership of the United Kingdom. And she also rightly referred to the Employment Summit for Women, which I think was a very positive affair, and also the issue of enterprise, women in enterprise, something dear to my heart. And I think we've got quite a good track record in this Parliament in trying to highlight awareness of the need to get more women into business, and we've had some very positive events in this Parliament to celebrate that. I thought Malcolm Chisholm made a very thoughtful contribution. Malcolm, of course, enjoys a fine reputation amongst women. I don't have to say that. I think he knows that for himself. He's a kind of honorary sister in his own right. And I totally agree. I totally agree with the concerns he continues to express about violence against women. And also he mentioned page 3, something with which I do sympathise, and Jackie Bailey has debated in this Parliament on that issue. When Malcolm Chisholm referred to the very telling statistic of 44% of women in the United Kingdom suffering violence, that actually is a pretty chilling reminder of just how stark the challenges are. My colleague Mary Scanlon, I thought, made some interesting points. Happily, and I didn't know this, she referred to the improvement in gender balance amongst the security officers in this Parliament, and I think to go from 16% to 41% is a matter of congratulation. She also again pointed out on the challenging front the problems for female adult learners in college education. Now, it is serious because in that arena, women are proportionately doing worse than men. And, you know, that's something we can't disregard, and I think the Scottish Government needs to take note of that. The other statistic Mary Scanlon used was her reference to new engineering starts, in respect of which 5% were female. If I can maybe beat a little drum of my own, I think in education we still need to reassure girls that they can choose careers which are not bound by stereotypical shapes and are not bound by traditional choices or customs, and we need to do more about that. Childcare is very important. Margaret McCulloch referred to that, Christina McKelvey as well. But can I say that childcare without the opportunity of education is a very limited benefit? You cannot take the one in isolation and not provide the other. I think finally, just to articulate a view of my own Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'll probably get strung up by David Cameron and Ruth Davison for saying this, and I emphasise an entirely personal view. On the commercial front, where we have boards of directors in our corporate governance entities, I actually would have a mandatory boardroom place for a workforce representative. And I would make that a term appointment, and I would alternate it between male and female. And I think that would be a major step forward. In conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, my party supports the motion and the amendment.
Thank you very much. And now Colin Shoney-Robertson, up to 6 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I first of all add my comments to those that have also been made about Ailsa-McKay, a great loss to Scotland, and of course our sympathies are with her family. I think the contributions in the main have been very constructive and very thoughtful. I thought Joanne Lamont set the tone for the debate in a very refreshing speech, and very constructive, I thought, very thoughtful, looking back on, importantly, the gains that have been made. And sometimes we don't talk about those often enough, because women have fought very hard to get the gains that we all benefit from here in the Parliament and out with in society, but importantly also laid out some of the continuing challenges that are faced by women that we need to collectively debate and find a way forward to address. We're definitely on a journey. We still have a long way to go. And I think the points made by a number of people about the pressure from women's organisations and groups and individuals out with this place have been very important in continually pushing us to do more and to do better. The Violence Against Women strategy is very much part of that work, being influenced by those organisations that campaign day in, day out to reduce the violence against women. I think the fact that we have a gender approach to violence against women is testament to the work of a lot of women's organisations over the years that we've been able to carry on, that was previously started under the previous administration. And we're, again, we look forward, of course, to the new Violence Against Women strategy that will be coming forward in a few weeks' time. The other comments that were made, if I could just turn to some of those. I think Christina McKelvey outlined very well the benefits of childcare and the economic case for expanding the number of women in the workplace. Malcolm Chisholm, as ever, made a very good speech and talked about the EU report recently on gender violence, showing us that the statistics are still horrific, and that's why we need to continually redouble our efforts to tackle violence in our society, starting with the attitudes of the next generation, to try to make sure that we change some of those underlying attitudes that lead to violence against women and girls. Maureen Watt paid tribute quite rightly to Anne Glover's role at the Commission and the fact that the Commission is looking at action at a European level to reduce the pay gap. It is worth noting that actually in Scotland we do have a slightly better position in terms of the pay gap compared to the rest of the UK, but we should not be complacent because we also have a long way to go in addressing that issue. I think also a number of members have extolled the virtues of making sure that we open up the opportunities to girls and women into other areas of employment. And again, I think Angela Constance spoke a lot about that in her opening speech. Yes, briefly.
Kezia Dugdale. Thank you, President Officer. I wonder if the Minister would accept that there has been a significant reduction in part-time places at colleges and that that has impacted disproportionately on women. Yes or no? Minister.
Well, there is actually a majority of women in full-time student places. 52% of full-time students aged 16 to 24 years were female. So I think there is an element of additional money also going into colleges, which I believe will be very helpful in expanding places for women and for men, hopefully something the member will welcome. I want to move on just to say a little bit about the progress that we're making around the consultation that has been launched to improve the position of women in public life, and it's quite interesting that we have fairly wide support for that from across the chamber. I thought Annabel was going to talk about that. Annabel was going to talk about that, but I'm sure I've heard her previously making supportive comments about the position of women in public life. Unfortunately, those powers are reserved to Westminster, but Jo Swinson, in her reply to me, did open the door to the Scottish Government coming forward with concrete proposals about how we try to ensure that there is progress made on not just public boards but potentially corporate boards and third sector, which is why we will be next month launching a consultation to look at whether there is support for a 40% minimum position for women, certainly within public boards, and will take the temperature of boards elsewhere.
Please, Minister?
I would hope that that will have the support from people across this chamber, and I'll certainly be garnering that support, because I think it's very important when we do go back to the UK Government that we have that support across all of the parties, and I look forward, hopefully, to receiving that in due course.
Many thanks. And to now call on Jenny Mara to wind up. Maximum 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to also support the Government's amendment tonight, as well as our motion, and associate myself with the comments that have been made on the late Ailsa-McKay and her contribution in this Parliament and in Scottish public life. The Labour Party, Presiding Officer, has a long and a very proud tradition of advancing the role of women in our communities. It was our Minister, Barbara Castle, who recognised that child benefit was better placed in the purses of women than in the pockets of men. And it was she too who pioneered the Equal Pay Act in 1970, one of the most important pieces of progressive legislation for the economy and for women in the 20th century. It's now been 44 years since the Equal Pay Act. But despite our progress, we still live in a country where even the most fundamental rights of women, like that to a fair wage, are still not realised. And as we made our way to work this morning in Scotland, thousands of women across our country made their way to work and jobs that pay them 17% less than their male colleagues, a point that was well made by Claire Adamson. And we know through countless studies and evidence to this Parliament that as well as earning less, women are more likely to work part-time hours in temporary jobs or on zero-hours contracts completely unsuited to their needs and their responsibilities and their caring responsibilities. Such is the scale of female underemployment highlighted in continual government statistics over the last few years that the gap between women's part-time hourly rate and men's equivalent full-time hourly rate is over a third. And because of that, the gender gap in pensions has now grown to over £1,000 a year, and that is the widest it has been in decades. We can't rely on the Equal Pay Act alone to solve this. We must innovate and find new and creative ways across all our parliaments and in our communities to make improvements. In the coming months, we will consider how we reform our public sector procurement. I believe we need to take action through our laws to eradicate the barriers that so clearly keep women from meaningful and gainful employment. We are clear that a contract of employment should give women the opportunity to plan, to save and provide peace of mind, and not leave her unsure if she can feed the family from one week to the next. Zero-hour contracts are particularly pernicious and they particularly affect women. Presiding Officer, the whole issue of zero-hour contracts takes me back. My great-great-grandfather, a jute mill worker in Dundee, spent his days running from mill to mill every morning looking for a shift. He was on a zero-hour contract alongside the thousands and thousands of female mill workers in Dundee. They were not good enough for my great-grandfather or the female mill workers in Dundee, and they are not good enough for women across Scotland today. And that is why Scottish Labour, through amendments tabled by my colleague Mary Fee, will insist that the procurement bill bans government services being contracted to companies who use exploitative zero-hour contracts, because it is the responsibility of government to set an example and place itself proudly at the vanguard of fairer employment rules. But we must be more ambitious still. We know that when women are adequately represented at the top of companies, the pay and conditions for all women in that company improve. And that is why Scottish Labour voted in the European Parliament for gender quotas on the boards of big business, to tackle the inbuilt discrimination of an appointment system that is a false meritocracy and one that keeps women from achieving their potential, regardless of our capabilities. And that is also why I have moved several amendments in this Parliament in 3 separate pieces of legislation to have gender quotas on the boards of our public bodies. Unfortunately, those amendments were defeated. And that is why I am pleased to hear the Government say today that they are finally going to consider a consultation for gender quotas on the boards of public authorities. And I look forward to their legislative proposal after that consultation. But I would also... Yes.
Minister. The consultation will provide the evidence to the UK Government, who are absolutely clear that is where the reserve power lies. And we know, of course, you do accept what the UK Government says about constitutional matters.
Jenny Mara.
I think the Minister knows that I do not accept that she has tested the power of this Parliament and the devolution settlement, which she knows is fluid, to actually see if powers are vested with it. It is fluid, and it's been shown to be fluid before. If the Government were serious, as I have said in this chamber before, if the Government were serious and if the Minister was serious about putting gender quotas on public boards, she would put an act before Parliament, it would go before the Lord Advocate, and we would see if there was power vested in this building. I would also remind the Government, though, at the powers they have now, they have the power of policy at their fingertips. And it was a crying shame that just last week, on Tuesday of last week, the Scottish Government announced 11 new regional chairs of college boards across Scotland. Only 2 of those new chairs were women. They have the power of policy through the public appointments process, and they should put their money where their mouth is and start to advocate equality through the policy process. Presiding Officer, I think this has been a good debate today. I think last week's announcement on college boards shows that this debate is still necessary and timely, and we will continue to fight across this chamber for women's equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mara. That concludes the debate on women in Scotland. It's now time to move to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 9298,
in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a business programme. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 9298.
Presiding Officer, happy to move the business motion which was agreed by the Bureau on Tuesday.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 9298, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of a Parliamentary Bureau motion. I would ask Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 9299 on the designation of lead committee.
Presiding Officer, the Bureau is suggesting that the Education and Culture Committee should be the designated lead committee.
I thank you for that, Minister, and for the few seconds that we've used up.
I'm sorry, Anna, I think I forgot to actually move the Bureau motion in my name.
I'm even more grateful, Minister. The question on this motion will be put at decision time, to which we now come. There are 7 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that in relation to the debate on air quality in Scotland, if the amendment in the name of Paul Wheelhouse is agreed, the amendment in the name of Jamie McGrigor falls. The first question then is amendment number 9294.3 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse, which seeks to amend motion number 9294 in the name of Claire Baker on air quality in Scotland, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the amendment number 9294.3 in the name of Paul Wheelhouse is as follows. Yes, 65. No, 57. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed to, and the amendment in the name of Jamie McGrigor falls. The next question then is amendment number 9294.2 in the name of Patrick Harvey, which seeks to amend motion number 9294 in the name of Claire Baker on air quality in Scotland, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 9294.2 in the name of Patrick Harvey is as follows. Yes, 8. No, 114. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. The next question is that motion number 9294 in the name of Claire Baker as amended on air quality in Scotland be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion number 9294 in the name of Claire Baker as amended is as follows. Yes, 114. No, 8. There were no abstentions. The motion as amended is therefore agreed to. The next question is amendment number 9293.1 in the name of Shona Robertson, which seeks to amend motion number 9293 in the name of Joanne Lamont on women in Scotland, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The amendment is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 9293 in the name of Joanne Lamont as amended on women in Scotland be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 9299 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on the designation of a lead committee be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. We now move to members' business. Members should leave the chamber, should do so quickly and quietly.